Welcome back to the last segment of the day. We have an exciting panel discussion coming up next on the future of sustainable development. This panel will feature Prof. Martin Green, Prof. Sir Konstantin Novoselov, Prof. Wang Rong, and Prof. Iris Yu. Moderating the panel today will be Prof. Benjamin Cashore, who holds the Lee Ka-shing Chair in Public Management at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. Please warmly welcome the panel and our moderator, and I now hand the session to Prof. Cashore.
Good afternoon. It is truly a pleasure to be here as a political scientist who works on matters of sustainability and the environment, and who knows full well that the problems that come to us on the questions of sustainable development, especially when it comes to climate, biodiversity, and related ecological processes, are those that are discovered by scientists working in the field. And not only discovered by, but the scientists in the field and doing the basic and applied research give us the knowledge we need to make a difference in solving and addressing these problems. So today we've got a wonderful panel. You already have heard from the panelists, but we've got a wonderful panel today of 4 leading scientists. I often say that I'm a political scientist. And when my son, when he was younger, I asked him, Walter, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, Daddy, I want to be a scientist, but not like you. He said, I want to be a real scientist. And he meant the people in this room who do the actual science that gives us the problems that we all care about. And it's the conversation across these different knowledge sources that is so important for addressing and producing knowledge that's important by itself, but also for generating innovative solutions. So the panelists that we have today couldn't be more appropriate and important for thinking of these conversations. Professor Martin Green from New South Wales, as you know, who won the Millennium Technology Prize and is a Scienta professor at the University of New South Wales. We have Professor Sir Konstantin Novoselov, is that good? Not bad? Yeah. Who, as you know, won the Nobel Prize in Physics, which, by the way, my son studied. Okay, that real scientist also. In 2010, and works, of course, on carbon capture, among many other issues. And Professor Wang Rong, who is the president's chair at NTU, who works on wastewater management, and Professor Iris Yu, who is here in this very university in civil environmental engineering, who works on biomass. So what a great group, both in terms of the knowledge and methods they apply, but also the problems they're seeking to address. So I want to frame this conversation. We're going to have questions from myself to the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to you as well. And I want to frame this conversation around recognizing that in the last half century, really going back to the Stockholm conference in 1972, if not even before then, that scientists, real scientists, have contributed to both understanding the nature of global environmental and sustainability challenges, as well as uncovering innovative solutions to resolving them, from climate change to biodiversity to water sustainability. Science and scientists have made, as you know, profoundly important contributions. But at the same time, most scientists, and I'm guessing many of you in this room, are frustrated at the pace and scale of addressing the challenges that are facing this planet, especially when it comes to the climate and biodiversity crises, and I would add the just transitions dimension of that as well. So given these dynamics, positive knowledge and outcomes, but also accelerating challenges, what are the lessons that we have learned about the most impactful nature of scientific research? What kind of research is most useful? What is most problem-focused? And also, what is most forward-looking? And from my interest as a non-real scientist in the policy world, how do we take this knowledge and diffuse it to the policy systems and the governance systems that then act in ways to shape our behaviors? So this panel and our conversation is going to be designed to reflect on these kinds of questions, especially thinking about the work of our panelists on solar technology, carbon capture, wastewater management, and upcycling bio-waste. So with that, I want to begin a question and ask every one of our panelists to start out. And the question is the following. What do you think is the role of scientists and science in helping governments solve critically important sustainability challenges highlighted by the climate and biodiversity crises? What's the role of science and scientists?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I guess I've been involved with solar cell development. So obviously, I'd say the role is to develop technology and ideas that can address the challenges that we face. And I think obviously we need new ways of generating our energy in future. We can't rely on the fossil fuels that have provided such an important role in bringing state of development worldwide to the state that we presently all enjoy. But we need to find another way of doing that. So we need a new technology to make that possible.
And what do you think then in terms of that research agenda? What does that mean for you choosing what research to study and the kinds of resources you seek to obtain?
Yeah, my career has been largely in academia, although I have been involved with the spin-offs and so on, so I've had some commercial experience. But, in academia, we had to continue bringing research grants in to sustain the research activities we're interested in. So that very much motivated the research directions we had to take. So we had to keep improving what we were doing to keep the group intact, essentially. So I guess it was, in my case, it was making a better solar cell that kept our group alive. So we had to keep improving the solar cell performance so we could put in the next grant application that would keep my fellow researchers employed for another 3 years or whatever the period of the grant was for.
Yeah. I'm going to come back later on in a follow-up to you to ask about how we then take that kind of response and think about the resources governments have in allocating their scarce resources for different kinds of research. But I want to come to that in a follow-up and first turn to Professor Sir Konstantin Novoselov about then, what do you think about this question, about the role of science and scientists?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate you on inventing a new acronym, SLU. It's like PLU, people like us, but now it's scientists like us. So we just make a border there, and scientists like us, because the good thing about science that it will never end, and I'm sure that there will be new technologies invented, more efficient solar cells or contacts to the solar cells, more efficient fuel cells, catalysts, and so on. The problem is that, of course, already now, if we would have implemented most of those solutions which we've got right now, we would be much more greener and sustainable. And you mentioned this word, frustrated with the governmental decisions. But when you think about this, it's actually, there is nothing to be frustrated about, because if you want it or not, but SLU includes yourself as well. Politics and economics is unfortunately a real science as well, and there are certain rules and certain laws which you can't, or very, very difficult to break. Probably in few decades, when we understand how human brain works, so politics and economics would become physics rather than social scientists. And then it basically means that SLU, SOU includes yourself, and then so for physicists, for material scientists, for chemists, we just I think we've got to work on the topics which we do. So you just improve the performance of the solutions which we've got now, and then hopefully that at certain moment we will break this economic barrier which impedes the implications of those in the real life.
I mean, just to follow through, I really appreciate your response. Do you feel that because of the knowledge that you hold and the things that you generate knowledge around, that you have a more important responsibility as a scientist than other knowledge holders or other people in society?
I'd love to agree with you. Unfortunately, in reality, it doesn't work the same way because, as I said, economics got its own rules, and it's extremely, so you can fight against it, but unless you have some the price and the technology and the way of manufacturing on your side. Right. It's very, very difficult to win against this, even if you are equipped with all the knowledge you have.
I'm going to come back to that question of scientific, technical knowledge, and then the policy process, which involves things such as democracy and engagement that can sometimes then filter that.
Well, policy again, it's slightly different. It's of course policy creates on the forecasting, and that's if you ask any scientist what's going to happen with their invention, they would tell you that they're really good at predicting the past, but just struggle with the future.
Yeah,
and that's unfortunately at this moment you see that this area is given completely to just into the realm of the politicians, and they struggle there as well.
Yeah, you know, it's a little aside, but an important aside for this conversation around knowledge generation is that political science tries to predict the future, but as you say, often doesn't do a great job. And after, when I was in Yale's environment school for a number of years, and after President Trump was elected, most political scientists had not predicted this outcome. And so the discipline itself was undergoing some angst. And there was an article that I assigned to my classes called God Gave Physics the Easy Problems, reflecting on the political science challenges.
Look, if you want to switch topic and tell us all about the new presidential elections in US, we will be all ears. We are really curious.
We are not switching topics. This is big enough, but that does relate, of course. But I want to turn now to Professor Wang Rong and your thoughts on then the role of science and scientists.
I believe science and the scientists play a very important role to address the sustainability challenges. Yeah. Scientists conduct comprehensive research to analyze the systems, the complexity, and provide evidence-based insight to the policymakers. Yeah. That's one role. And scientists also can invent innovation, the new technology, to mitigate the impact of the climate change or to maintain the sustainability. For example, myself, I work on the membrane science and technology to handle the water issue. Water is essential for life and essential for the sustainable development of the society. If we can invent new technology that can reduce the energy cost significantly to make the system more sustainable, that's a big contribution. So I believe scientists play a critical role to address the challenges.
Thank you. I'm going to come back in a second round and ask you a question about the technological challenges in things like water when you're dealing with technologies that often work against that purpose as well. And I'm going to come back to that in the second round of questioning. Yeah. Professor Iris, can you tell us a bit about your thoughts on this question?
So I think science and scientists, they are the hardware, I would say. we cover a wide spectrum, starting from the very fundamental understanding of the scientific phenomenon to the establishment of a new infrastructure. So I think science is really the foundation of everything.
Thank you. And it's the foundation of everything, but do you feel you have a responsibility, again, given your knowledge that you're producing, to somehow not only produce that knowledge for journals and get grants, but to disseminate it with society and policymakers?
I don't see this as a sense of responsibility, but this is where my passion lies. So I want to do something good, hopefully, for the whole society and community with my own interest in research. So these two actually align. I like looking at engineering stuff, and I'm excited about the new technologies. And at the same time, I hope the world will be better. So so in my case, these two, they align very well, and that's what put me in this position now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back now to this question about actually research methods and design and real scientists and not real scientists and predictability, and ask you a question, all four of you, about one critique that's being made in the social science world about scientists, real, and I'm half kidding when I say real scientists, is that there's such an effort to always be cautious and to reproduce results at a large level before announcing your results, that sometimes the dissemination of the knowledge itself, from discovery to then getting recognized in peer-reviewed journals and society, can take 2 or 3 years, when the crisis itself that we're facing on climate and biodiversity requires that we act sooner. I've got a former colleague at Yale, his name is Pete Raymond. He discovered that forests were bleeding, leaking way more carbon than they thought previously through water systems. The water was bringing carbon out of the forest ecosystems. And I said, Pete, you've got to tell people about this. Their modeling on how to therefore sequester carbon is going to need to be changed. And he said, oh, I can't do that until I get it published in a couple of journals, and then I can announce that data. But then it would have been too late. So how do you handle this time dimension problem? Rigorous science, but the critical need to act soon. Maybe I'll just start with all of you getting in the same order. Professor Green, what are your thoughts on that challenge?
Yeah, we never really faced that challenge, because the good thing about my field was its measurement of the solar cell performance is very quantifiable, and the precedent had already been set in the field where any new result needed to be independently confirmed. And that was a lot more, that could be done a lot more quickly than getting a paper published. So it was in the 80s, it was a matter of shipping the cells off in a little package, sealed up, sending them over to the US where the recognized test centers were, and then having it measured. And pre-fax machines, which I go back to that era, I used to have to ring up the US first thing in the morning to catch them in the afternoon there. Wow. And just how'd those cells go? And then hopefully they'd had them measured by the time I rang. So generally just a few days after I estimated the cells would arrive. And then that certification was all I needed to be able to talk about the results. So it happened quite quickly, and I could put that information into grant applications and present it at conferences and things like that, which was the main medium in our field for transmitting information, was probably conferences rather than journal papers.
But how do we go from the conferences and journal papers then to then your knowledge getting diffused into society?
Yeah, well, that took a bit longer, because solar cells really used to be quite expensive, and it took a long time before the costs got under control. As I mentioned in my talk, it was just a serendipitous combination of events around the turn of this century that saw the development of the manufacturing industry in China, and an injection of huge amount of funding from US investors into that manufacturing activity. So it was just a combination of events that all came together at the right point in time, and that's what kick-started the industry. So the industry needed scaling up to get to the costs of that we're now seeing with solar. So obviously that was always needed, because that's what's happened. But there wasn't the incentive to employ the cells until they were cheap. So it was a chicken and egg situation we always used to talk about. You need to get the market up before the cells become cheap, but no one's going to buy the cells till they are cheap. So it was, that situation was just overcome by serendipity in our case.
Yeah, and this point about chicken and egg and making solar cheaper is also a policy design market question I want to come back to in subsequent questions. So thank you for that. Professor Novoselov, what do you think about this tension between the scientific method being somewhat conservative and slow and the need to produce data quickly?
Right, okay, so just before we proceed, just wanted to point your attention that apparently you said something so interesting that there's a lady already queuing to ask you a question. So
okay,
yeah,
awesome. We're going to get to you. We're going to get to you.
right, but
I promise.
Just I'm not sure if there is how much urgency is there, because if you look at the history of the inventions and the technologies which we use now for the sustainability, it's very rarely one single invention. So it's usually a series of inventions and developments and technologies which lead to a certain solution. So even with the say lithium batteries or with the solar cells, nuclear, no one knew what to do with the nuclear when it was first invented. It took 30 years easily before we start getting it into something more useful than atomic bomb, and that's generally the case. So it's again there should be a critical mass of technologies and the understanding before it gets into a real life innovations. But then, of course, as Martin already mentioned, you cannot implement any technology as sustainable because the cost can be so prohibitive, but also the technology would be so immature that it's not green at all. So I don't know if you get lithium in some simple manner, you would waste more on the electrolysis rather than on the early stage batteries. So in order for any technology even to become sustainable, it needs to cross a certain threshold.
Yeah.
So I'm quite satisfied with the way science is developing at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to come back again to both these points around then the need to bring prices down and then find a way to develop technology consistent with that, given these imperatives we're facing with the 1.5 degree Paris Accord and, of course, biodiversity loss. So, Professor Wang, what are your thoughts on this challenge?
And depends on the nature of the study. Sometimes one topic takes a very long time.
Yeah.
We make progress step by step. Yeah. This is the process accumulation of the understanding and the knowledge. But when it comes to the breakthrough, that's really need a lot of the efforts.
Yeah.
For my own technology, in the morning I give the presentation. It takes about 14 years to reach the commercialization stage. Starting from the zero, from the laboratory.
14 years?
Yeah, 14 years, 1-4.
Okay.
So we need to get the continuous funding support.
Yeah.
That's one of the key factors. And also we need to be patient and persistent and to continue to work. Otherwise, only, in the hard way or just in the middle way, you just drop, then you will not see something happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe scientists should be patient and passionate as well.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that question again too, because maybe I'll actually ask you that question now. You say patience, and I can really respect that. And that goes to the first part of the question around science being, many argue, conservative to make sure the results are really well done. But many in the policy and societal world, including the government of Singapore, including in Southeast Asia and the globe, are feeling the opposite, that we can't be patient. because of these challenges facing society, that if we don't act soon, we'll hit these tipping points. So how do you handle this patient requirement versus the urgent requirement?
Okay, so in this case, I believe, the agency or the policymaker and the government agency should collaborate with the scientists to invest more in the urgent issue.
Yeah.
Then we can speed up the progress.
Yeah, no, I love that answer because in our institute, that's our mission now, is speeding up time between science and policy to accelerate these pathways. So I want to come back to that too, but thank you, I appreciate your answer. Yeah, Professor Iris, what are your thoughts on this tension?
Yes, I think technology innovations does take a lot of time. And with money, of course, we can speed it up. And with money and also with resources, like bring the right people in the same group and work together. Especially, we are talking about multidisciplinary research nowadays. Because if we want to establish a new technology, we don't just look at a single process, but what about the end of life, how to treat the waste, and how do we source the raw materials? Are they sustainable? So definitely we will need a mix of expertise. So I think we have to really focus on collaboration nowadays, and also the settings of the academia. Also, maybe it's good to place more resources on that in terms, instead of rewarding individuals' trophy.
Yeah, I mean, I really love your point about collaboration. And in our institute, on the policy side, we're trying to identify processes that collaborate the most effectively and quickly on these questions. Because again, going very different scholarly backgrounds, very different ways of seeing the world, but that knowledge is all critical for accelerating these pathways. So I really appreciate your answer. I'm going to ask one more really awkward question, okay? And then I'm going to get into some more sort of proactive, positive impacts questions. But here's the awkward question I want to pose of all of you. Now, I find when you acknowledge your question's awkward, it's easier to ask than without acknowledging it. So I acknowledge this is awkward. And here's the awkward question. When I look back on the amazing impacts of science and technology in our world, which of course the last 100 years has witnessed in so many ways, we see innovations that are both on the one hand amazing, but also cause problems as well. This is a scientific term we call the whack-a-mole effect. Okay, you know this game whack-a-mole? It's this game that children play in North America where you have 6 holes in a board, and then you have a big hammer, and a mole pops out of one hole, and you smash that mole down, but then a mole pops out of another hole. And then you smash that mole down, and the mole pops out from another hole. In other words, you solve a problem, but you cause another problem. The whack-a-mole effect is the scientific term that we use in our lab to discuss this challenge. So when we think, for example, about the internal combustion engine, what an amazing scientific technological breakthrough, incredible innovation that's changed the last 100 years for the better in so many ways. But what did it do, right? It caused this climate crisis we're now all addressing. Likewise, electronic vehicles are, again, the result of massive technological innovations that are doing wonderful things to reduce energy intensity, but they increase mineral extraction on geographically, ecologically sensitive areas. So how do each of you, think about the whack-a-mole effect in your research? How does it guide you, if any way, in how you plan both the research you do and then how you interpret that research for impacting society? Professor Martin Green, do you want to?
Yes. I guess we deliberately focused our research on things we thought were sustainable. So we tried to avoid digressing into strands of research in photovoltaics, for example, that involved elements that were toxic, or non-abundant was the other issue we tried to avoid. So there are several solar cell technologies that have been commercialized apart from silicon, although not in the same volume, that involve compounds like cadmium telluride, where cadmium's toxic and tellurium's very scarce, or copper, indium, gallium diselenide, where the indium and gallium are scarce. So that we tried to avoid devoting effort to those materials. So we concentrated largely on silicon on that account, and it turned out to be the winner, at least up to the present. And the other materials we're working on, we're trying to restrict ourselves to materials that satisfy those criteria of non-toxicity and natural abundance. So that's how we've tried to avoid undecidable side effects from the work that we're doing.
And I think what's amazing about your work too, solar itself is a response to the whack-a-mole effect in many ways. And so you're finding a technology that can actually address what was a larger challenge. And you're saying you can even in that context minimize the whack-a-mole effects in how you design your research and the applied parts.
Yeah. Yes, no, exactly. And there have been various studies of side effects that could arise from the enormous scale of deployment of photovoltaics that we're going to need to displace fossil fuels from our energy system. Yeah. And there have been various issues identified and that are being studied in that context. So there still might be whack-a-mole effects with large-scale deployment of solar that that emerge as the scale of installation becomes on the scale that's needed.
Yeah. But I do love your answer because one, solar is a critical part of decarbonization. We know we have to do that. That's a mole we have to whack. And your answer is let's whack that mole and let's find ways to minimize other ones, which to me is very much the way we think about it in our institute as well, given these fundamental challenges. Prof. Novoselov, what are your thoughts on this whack-a-mole effect?
Well, I'm sure that this effect exists, and of course, now with the height of our knowledge, you would think that we have thought about everything, and we're not going to get into the same trap. But of course, people before us who invented combustion engine, who created nuclear reactors, they thought exactly the same way before they knew the first nuclear disaster, right? But I don't have an answer to you, but the good thing that as a scientist we are allowed not to care about this, because so scientists, we don't need to answer the question why, we only answer the question how. And what I strongly believe that you cannot, even if you want it, you cannot stop the scientific progress. So it's just humans that they're just naturally wired in a way so that they want to know more. Even if you prohibit certain type of research on one continent, people will go to another one. If you stop it everywhere, someone will hire a cruise ship and do the experiment there. You cannot stop that.
Right.
So we just have to live with it. And so as a scientist, I'm really grateful that I'm relieved from this. I can give some advice to the politicians, but it won't stop me doing my research.
I really appreciate your answer. We can't stop it, but I would also recognize your own work. You can decide what to research, and what you're researching is, in fact, I would argue in many ways part of thinking about these moles.
I don't think so, because again, you're asking quite deep philosophical questions.
Yeah.
What is science, and is science a product of one beautiful mind, or is it right. You're always standing on the shoulders right. of the giant? So I think there is science got this very strange effect that all the discoveries are made by a particular person, but in fact it's somewhere there is a background of the collective work, and in this sense, I don't think you can consciously stop the scientific progress anyhow.
Yeah, and to be clear, I wasn't arguing in my question for that. I was thinking about what parts of the scientific process do we emphasize given these interaction effects. Prof. Wang?
Indeed, when we invent some new technologies, the process may produce some negative impact to the environment. But I think the key is that we need to have a comprehensive analysis on each step and how to minimize the negative impact.
Right.
The balancing is important. For example, in my research, I developed a new type of the membranes for water treatment, but during the fabrication process, I used solvent, chemical solvent, and they will dissolve in the water. It means I also generate some of the wastewater. But can we consider use green chemicals to solve the issue?
Right.
And when we set the mass production line, actually we go through the environmental impact assessment and propose the methods to mitigate this type of the negative impact. Then we get through the approval. So I think we need to be very careful. We don't worry about too much, say because of negative impact, we stop the invention. But we need to think about how to mitigate and minimize the negative impact.
Yeah. I want to reinforce your point, because in your answer, you discussed green chemistry, which is now its own field. In fact, Paul Anastas at Yale was one of the founding members of green chemistry, designed to think about this very question. But then you mentioned environmental impact assessment, which is a policy tool that asks scientists and researchers to think more carefully about their future impacts.
Yes, I think environmental impact assessment is very important.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And that reinforces the importance of the science policy interface, imagining these scientific discoveries towards problem solving, not just whack-a-mole creating effects. Prof, how was you?
So I work on catalytic conversion of biomass or bio-based molecules. So similar to Prof. Wang's approach, so we also consider the use of greener chemicals, greener solvents. And but sometimes, especially for me as a starter in academics, and sometimes we just bump into problems. Oh, I'm using a greener alternatives, but the performance is bad. So we are just going back and forth these, but I agree that we do have to keep in mind, or we have to stick to greener alternatives. I think that's the best thing we can do for now. And of course, a very detailed assessment of the impacts and also the carbon emissions would be very important. But that would be a bit beyond my expertise, and so I cannot get a very accurate number for the carbon emissions of my technology right now. So that will really rely on my future collaborators.
Right, which nicely reinforces the need to have these kinds of knowledge dissemination within the scientific community and then across to the policy world. Now, I'm going to flag here. I have two questions I'm going to follow up with you on. One about your individual research contributions to the world, and then I'm going to ask a question about the policy process. But before I do that, I really do recognize that this woman has been spending a lot of time waiting here for us. So I want to, before I open the audience to the audience in general, I do want to turn to a very patient questioner.
Yes, thank you for your consideration. So my name is Tian Xiao, and I am studying environmental science in the University of Tsukuba in Japan right now. So my question is about the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which was obviously signed in 2015 by United Nations for a lot of countries, and there are 17 goals that they said humans should all act together, which and perform it before 2013. And based on their last year's report, apparently we are slightly behind the schedule. And the report attributed this to the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine, and a weak global economy, and also the COVID-19, the impact of these factors. And so I want to ask you, what's your opinions that is holding back the achievement of SDGs for us, if not partially or fully attributed to the development of science itself and the policymakers? Do you agree with what was said in the report that was published by the United Nations?
So the question is, we have these really important SDGs, of which there are 17. Some are not being achieved as quickly as people had hoped. And your question is, what explains this lack of?
What's your opinions? That's what explains that's the behind of schedule for that.
Yeah, is it a science question or is it a policy question? What
Like both.
Yeah. So, any takers?
Well, I think it's policy, honestly. So just my answer is the policy. So we just
Don't look at me. It's not my fault. Okay, policy.
So I mean, of course, there are all the other factors. You forgot to mention Chat GPT now, the data centers and all the AI models. They take 5% of our electricity consumption and so on. But at the end of the day, so there are technologies. And the question is the implementation, and the only reason is, well, politics. Like we've seen in some countries, you switch back to coal rather than using greener methods of electricity production, or basically money, which is similar. Well, there are similar examples.
Okay, so one vote for policy is the problem.
Yeah, I've been most involved with SDG 7, universal access to modern energy, and there I think it's like a financing that has been the issue. So, but the reduction in the costs of photovoltaics is sort of having some impact, but in a small scale way. So there are, millions of small solar systems deployed throughout poorer regions of the world now, where the solar is used for mainly for lighting and for mobile phone charging, are the two most popular applications. But one of my colleagues from the University of New South Wales recently came back from Uganda, and he showed me some footage of that he took walking down the main street in Gulu, which is a provincial town in Uganda, and it was really encouraging to see what was on offer was solar panels. This was a prime product that was on offer, to the citizens of Gulu, and this was so they could install them themselves on their local homes and so on for generating lighting and power for other needs that they wanted to satisfy. So it was I guess the photovoltaic product becoming economical on a small scale that the locals could afford, that has been helping to drive the uptake of solar in Africa in particular. So that was quite encouraging to see. So rather than a government plan program, it was the fact that the solar had become cheap that was allowing citizens to take their own initiative in becoming electrified.
I can give you another anecdote about solar. So the implementation of solar panels in UK was booming until, I can't remember exactly, but roughly 2015 or so. And then suddenly there was a quick drop, and it was magically coincided with the reduction in the amount of subsidies government produced. So you could clearly see that the market price on the global market didn't really change. So nothing else really influenced it, but the governmental policy influenced dramatically.
You got policy and finance, and not just top-down, but bottom-up innovations are possibilities. Did you too?
For me, I think, even during the COVID time, our lab's still working. So I believe that's a policy-related issue.
Yeah. So what was the policy, sorry? Can you repeat that?
I say, the person mentioned about because of the COVID, that's one of the factors.
Yeah.
But actually, during the COVID time, site is still working.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not me saying. That's the
report. The report, sorry.
Yes.
The report
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree. A policy, sorry, but of course everyone has a responsibility, right? I mean, all the countries and also investments as well. But I do see the light. As I recall, it said COP26. They start to think about phasing down coal. So this is the first time they mention about phasing down the use of fossil-based energy, and this is a big move, and we are going to see way more investments in renewables, and it also comes along with the development of a more mature carbon market. So there will be more. So we are expecting more mature framework to monitor those carbon trading. So we will see.
Yeah, I mean, from another side, just if we travel to Beijing tomorrow, it will be quite a pleasant city to be. Remember 10 years ago, you couldn't breathe there, right? So it was really awful, especially during summertime and winter time, when you either switch on the air cons or you have to provide central heating. It was terrible. Yeah. The situation changed entirely over maybe 6-7 years. So it's a complete policy to change from coal to nuclear. It's still far away from being complete, but it's again it's another example of, I would say, successful policy.
You know, I know this is a panel for real scientists, and I'm just the moderator, but I do want to briefly respond to your question too, because they've all mentioned policy, and we think in our institute, in our school, that it's the interaction of science and policy that's fundamental. But the question is how to do that. We've had 50 years of thinking of this question. And when I say people are frustrated, I mean the policymakers are frustrated, whether they be in the private sector or government, with what the scientists tell them they have to do to avert catastrophic ecological damage. So one thing we're working on is actually integrating knowledge across these different knowledge sources towards what we call policy design capacity building, in which you think of how do you trigger a transformative policy pathway. You might know what the policy ought to be, but how do you trigger a policy lock-in so that you actually get that pathway continuing? So you don't end up in the UK case of having the price of solar all of a sudden punctuate too early because of some external event. So one example we turn to a lot is the German government's what's called the feed-in tariff program. And this was an amazing program, I'm sure you know it, where the German government said, we want to accelerate the technology and the science around solar PV. It's not quite where it should be. We can't wait for the market to do it, but we love the market also. So how do we actually create a policy mix that can facilitate the market and technology faster than otherwise would have been the case? So what do? Long story short, they said instead of just giving subsidies, which are usually temporary and not locked in, we're going to give long-term 20-year contracts for German homeowners who put these solar panels on their rooftops. And what that did was, instead of being a subsidy but a contract, it meant that future governments, if they wanted to change the policy, would have to pay compensation costs because of the contractual nature of how contract law works. It cost the government $0 more, but it locked in that policy for 20 years. And then they said, oh, by the way, if you produce more energy than you consume when you put your solar panels on your rooftops, we're going to pay you for that, but at the retail rate, not the wholesale rate. This caused Germans to become really low-carbon behavior-seeking people because they made economic benefits out of that, right? Also locked in. Long story short, through a series of steps, more and more Germans called for this program when it came out, when they saw their neighbors doing so well. This became eventually a norm that having solar panels was appropriate as a citizen. This then generated market demand for solar PV, driving down the price and creating companies that now politically support the original policy, such that in Germany now, if you don't have a solar panel on your rooftop, you're considered not to be a good citizen. And 160 countries around the world adopted a similar kind of policy mix without any global convention requiring it. So that's a way of saying, I agree with the panelists, policy matters, but so do the markets and so do the technology, and it's how we find that mix to accelerate these pathways. So I apologize for being now for a second out of the moderator role, but I had to get that out to you. It's such an important question. I'm going to now ask you all to be thinking of your other questions. I'm going to ask one more question of the panelists and then turn it open to you for other questions, but thank you very much for getting us going in that regard.
Thank you all for your insights.
Great question. So my question to the panelists is, I know you've been discussing this already in the last 2 days, but if you can point to one thing in your research that you've been doing that you think has had one of the most practical effects for society in developing the Sustainable Development Goals and concerns that the governments are facing. What's one of a practical example that you haven't yet talked about or want to reinforce that you think is really key for how your research wasn't just basic research, but did really well on the applied side?
Yes, I guess in our case, our cell technology has been adopted very widely by industry, but it took a long time. So when we were producing these research results, you know, many people said that technology is too complex, it'll never be used commercially. But we pushed on anyhow, and because our survival depended on continually increasing the performance of the cells, we continued increasing it regardless of the sophistication of the cell structures. And now that cell structure that was regarded as very sophisticated has now become the simpler technology used in commercial production. So there's been a complete transition, but I guess, you know, I guess the commercial application of our work's quite obvious. It accounted for 90% of the market last year.
That's an amazing story. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I think the most practical implication of my work on the sustainability is that I switch off the monitor at the end of the day. That's as much as I can help the planet. We'll also switch from the resistive magnets to the superconducting magnets, which also less power as well. So we have quite a lot of work on a variety of energy-related solutions, from biological fuel cells to the hydrogen production and membrane for hydrogen separation and so on. They're mainly in the development stage. So that's the way we position our lab. Probably the most practical at the moment, what we do is the utilization of graphene for the concrete. It's the big switch from gasoline to hydrogen, which would require the hydrogen economy. And for many companies, hydrogen economy means carbon economy. And that's a big question: how can we utilize, and what do we do with the trillions tons of carbon which we produce, and how to make it circular so it would reduce the CO2 emission by itself. And in this sense, construction and the utilization of advanced carbons in construction is probably one of the most promising way.
Wow, thank you. Yeah. Really great to hear both of these responses because they're detailed and they're applied and they're linking the business case for impact. So thank you for that. Yeah.
I work on the membrane technology for water treatment. I have several technology that has been licensed to the industry, the company, for practical application. And I'm quite happy with that because I can see the real impact towards the sustainability.
Yeah, yeah. Also fantastic. And what in terms of the SDGs, you know, wastewater treatment is so fundamental.
Yeah, and our technology to produce new water with much less energy, that can make the water treatment system more resilient. And also the technology not only be used in Singapore, they can also be used in other water-stressed countries.
And then diffuse that knowledge elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. And that diffusion mechanism is so important. And I want to come back to that later too, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So I work on catalytic biomass conversion with the focus on using low energy technologies like use of microwave heating, and also interested in the development of catalysts as well. So hopefully I can, with our R&D, we can diversify the market right now, because when we talk about biomass, people used to think of anaerobic digestion or composting for food waste. So these are the biological approaches. And I think there's a need to have a wider spectrum of technologies to tackle this issue, because waste, biomass waste is a huge amount, and sometimes biological approaches take time. And the one advantage of chemical recycling is the speed, much faster. So I think it's a combination of technologies that will help the society.
Yeah, I love your point too, because you're pointing out what you've done to have an impact, but also the need to generate different sources of knowledge to accelerate that impact in the world. And that comes back to a theme we're having in this panel, how to accelerate this knowledge diffusion as quickly as possible. We've now got a great lineup. I'm going to go right and then left. So.
Hello, thanks a lot for this very nice discussion already. My name is Adam Bunzel. I'm a bioengineer from ETH Zurich in Switzerland. And my question goes towards developing novel sustainability applications. So we've already heard that this can take actually quite a long time to translate an initial invention to an industrial application. And so when I look in the audience, I guess there are quite a lot of people with very nice proof of concept data and a very clear idea for a downstream application. So I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions of what we could do at these early stages in order to facilitate these later translation into real-world applications?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I guess with my experience, it's really been particular to the given circumstances, and it was serendipity actually, so that things came together, including the German feed-in tariff scheme that was mentioned by our moderator. So it was just and that scheme in itself was just serendipity due to a power balance in the German parliament. So that was not a scheme that was guaranteed to see the light of day. So I think each technology, there's probably specific circumstances that surround it that will determine the most effective path to commercialization. So I'll bow out on that.
I won't be able to comment exactly on the technology. So there are lots of technologies being developed right now, and we still don't know what our future going to be. Is it going to be electric? Is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be fusion maybe, which is electric again? But the beauty of those technologies being developed is that what we see now is that our grids become more complex and more distributed, and the opportunity to sell back into grid, which is developed pretty much in any country, gives us the opportunity to create local energy production. So which open ways for lots of minute and niche technologies as well. I don't think we will all have nuclear reactor in our garden, but I can imagine we can have methane production and the electrolysis in our backyard. So that's quite possible.
How to speed up the technology translation, and based on my own experience, I would like to suggest you talk to the potential end user, the industry. And you test in your laboratory, but the condition may not be the same as in the real situation. You need to understand the application scenario and talk to the end user. they invite them in collaborate with you. Of course, you need to do the proper confidentiality and this type of NDA, non-disclosure agreement, this type of things. You get the support from your universities, the legal office. That's my experience.
Sorry, I don't have anything to add on. I'm still learning.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Wonderful. And we got quite the group now, so now I'm going to go to my left. And please give your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Siobhan. I'm a postdoc at ETH Zurich, now studying energy policy.
Great.
And my slightly awkward question is about the whack-a-mole effect. I think it can veer dangerously towards whataboutism. We have a lot of solutions, and they may cause friendlier moles or smaller moles, and we have to do something. So how do you think about that in your research? Communicating, write a future work section, talk about limitations to the model without accidentally contributing to some of the misinformation or slowing things down.
Well, so that's for me, that question.
Or you or anyone who wants to talk.
Maybe I'll come last then. Anybody? Yeah. I mean, my quick answer is the point of identifying the whack-a-mole effect, because that exists all over, is twofold. First, to decide which moles are the most important to whack, ones that cannot be ever allowed to appear. So, for example, in the social world, we've agreed that there will be no slavery. Okay, so that's a mole we're all whacking. Even if it causes economic harm, doesn't matter, no slavery. Okay, and we've agreed that at 1.52 degrees as a principle, but we haven't applied the policies consistent with that mole. So that's the first thing we do with the whack-a-mole effect. The second is to say, how do you minimize other moles that might emerge from that whacking that mole? And we heard some nice responses to that. But our point is, by talking about these things, we can make more effective choices. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, over here, and again, your name and where you're from.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm Jitske. I'm from Amsterdam. I work in the Netherlands Cancer Institute. And my question, it's a twofold question. So first of all, I would like to ask you, what would you think is the most important field of science towards working towards a sustainable future? Because I can think of food, water, and energy management. But I'm also thinking maybe we should be less self-centered on our human species, and we should work or put more efforts into biodiversity preservation, for example. And then the second part of my question is, if you're not in such a field, maybe you're in medicine-related field or more fundamental science, what can we do today as a scientist to make the most impact towards a sustainable future?
Physics?
Yeah, I can have a... I can have a go. I think the most important issue is climate change. So we can't continue to allow carbon to be pumped into the atmosphere because that's going to affect all the other issues that you mentioned. So I would put that as my number one. We need to control the emission of carbon into the atmosphere as quickly as we can so that the concentration remains not too far above where it presently is, and then maybe find some way of extracting it if the consequences of we haven't seen the consequences of the present level that we have now. That's still a few years down the track, so maybe we have to think about ways of withdrawing it, but I think that'll affect all the other issues that you mentioned.
Other responses?
I think as an individual, as a citizen, you also can contribute to the sustainability. For example, you change your lifestyle. You take the public transportation and you use renewable product. This is something I think as an individual we can do. Although your area, your research is not related to the sustainability development directly. That's my personal view.
I would just note, as moderator, your question began around morality and not just a human interest, and we got a clear answer that one of the moles that has to be whacked is the climate crisis. And then we heard a policy solution, but individuals can make a difference. And I think that's a really important conversation for us to be constantly having. What are the best policy mixes. Is it an accidental German government tariff that was a really an eclectic mix? Is it more individual? These are questions that are really important for, I think, getting at your question overall. Did you want to have a follow-up?
No, that's it.
You're good? Okay, good. Yeah. Thank you
you.
very much. Yeah. Now on this side. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, Professor. So my name is Adolphus Lai. I'm from the Singapore Nuclear Research and Safety Institute in NUS. I just have one generic question for the panel. So do you see that sustainable development can go hand in hand with economic development? And if not, what do you think, in your opinion, can we do to overcome such challenge?
Yeah, I can have a go. Prior to the last 10 years when solar emerged as a very cheap option, there was a lot of discussion about trade-offs that were going to be required in a transition to a sustainable future. And guys like Professor Nordeman was actually awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on looking at those types of trade-off. But I think the situation has changed dramatically over the last 10 years with the reduction in costs of the solar photovoltaics. And the really good news is the costs are still reducing. So there's this talk about insanely cheap solar down the track, and maybe even the third energy revolution I've heard some people talk about, the first being the agricultural, then the industrial, and this being the solar revolution, where we have this era of previously unheard of low costs for energy production. So I think economic trade-offs aren't required to transition to a sustainable future, and that's because of these changes in the cost structure of this alternative energy source.
And that gets to the issues then, why did that cost structure change historically? But thank you. Anybody else want to answer that question?
Well, I think we're still facing some investments which have to be made, and it's mainly in the infrastructure, and those would be quite costly. But then you have to compare them with those costs with the cost of not doing anything, and it's very difficult to estimate. But even those simple mass of the seawater rising and the climate changing, I think over the 10 years period it would be completely outbalanced.
I would just add one other additional point, which is that it's really great that now we're getting to a state where renewables are competing now with non-renewables. And so you can say now there's not that same kind of trade-off that there used to be. But if you ask why, it's often because of some kind of regulatory policy mix that created that in the first place. Those initial ones, though, that happened 10 years ago in Germany, 15 years ago, were not consistent with an economically optimal story. They are now. So being careful to think about when economics matters and how, and the temporal dimension is important for answering your question as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, professors.
Yeah. Okay, over here.
Professors, good afternoon. My name is Ye Zhang, and I'm from Hiroshima University, Japan. I study civil engineering and concrete science. So recently, I've been working on to reduce the carbon footprint in civil engineering aspect. However, as I found out that in some places and regions where the CO2 emission is really high, however, government and people are struggling with low income. That is to say, in places where the sustainable and green technology are mostly needed, they simply cannot afford it or have the condition to it. So my question is, as scientists, what is your idea and comment for us for how to bring the sustainable and green technology to people who really need it but cannot afford it?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I can have a go. There are discussions of paying for carbon offsets and so on. So wealthier countries subsidising reduction of carbon in less wealthy countries. So that's one aspect to it, and the other is we're working hard to get the costs of solar even cheaper, even though they're regarded as the cheapest option for generating electricity, in many countries now. So making it even cheaper will make it even easier for their use in lower income areas.
But even in the traditional construction, there are now ways how to reduce quite significantly the use of concrete. So there are different. So I already mentioned technological solutions which do work and which do work really efficiently and being already applied in some countries. Plus, we see a switch from the traditional construction to new alternative, more recyclable materials, and those suppose, I mean, in principle, they can be made even cheaper. So you can so wood is now, processed wood is being and cellulose is being used increasingly more. So our modern chemistry make it really strong and durable. So I do think that there are alternatives to the traditional construction.
Did you want to? You know, I would just add one point to this. The level of finance committed to addressing your question, has never been higher. Ever since the Glasgow COP a couple of years ago, and Mark Carney's efforts and so on, the amount of resources in both the public and private spheres to address your question, at least at the commitment level, has never been higher. But one challenge is how to then transfer those resources, so those commitments, to actual resources and then deploy them. So, for example, I was just at the Green Climate Fund's annual evaluation units meeting in South Korea a few weeks ago, where they're thinking, what's the best way to get this money that they have to the best communities in the field? You begin with the national body, or do you go right to the communities? And if so, which community do you go to, and how do you deploy this? This governance challenge becomes really critical, and people are now working on it, but they realize it's got to be faster and swifter as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, over here.
Hi, my name is Madeline. I'm from the University of Oxford, where I study human sciences. I just wanted to draw your attention to two of the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations that we mentioned earlier, specifically number 5 and number 10, about addressing gender inequality and inequalities in general, both between people and between nations. So I'm wondering, what do the panelists think is the role of science and scientists as individuals in addressing these goals? Thank you.
Wonderful question. Thank you.
I think it's really a tough question. So how can we go to the developing countries which burn coal for their energy production and tell them to switch back into new and then renewable energy sources? That's I think it would be very difficult politically. No one would listen. And it's not really clear how can you do this. And in that sense, I think science is actually, that's my experience working with in several such areas, helps enormously. So you can transfer technology through, whether through scientific collaboration or direct transfer, and that promotes this switch even in the underdeveloped countries. So that is from what I observed, it was really efficient solution and efficient method.
Would you care to answer this question? You know, I would just say this is one of the most important questions now being discussed at global levels. Even in the COP meetings now, the question of just transitions and equity is at the forefront. From whether it's loss and damage payments to thinking about gender equality and how you generate equity alongside the imperative to address the climate mole. So that alone, your question alone, is worthy of not just one of its own session, but of its entire workshop. And how we do this as a global community and within our countries is fundamental, because everybody agrees that without just transitions that recognize gender equality and equity issues, you're not going to get the political support you need for these kinds of transformations. So I just reinforce the importance of your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Over here.
Hi, it's been a great workshop today. My name is Matthew from New Zealand, I'm a PhD student working in plant pathology and plant physiology. Something that I've always had a problem with in general in society is that we don't really cost things appropriately for what environmental impact they have. As a society, we sort of subsidize production of things, but we don't really cost it based on how much carbon it costs, really. Like if we were to then take the carbon out of the atmosphere again, the cost of that could be mitigated. We could charge, effectively put a tariff on a product to say this is how much money it costs to pull the carbon out of the atmosphere again. And similar things for ecological environments that have to be worth something in order to save them rather than doing the right thing. So I sort of guess my question is how do you think society would look if we actually charged the appropriate cost for products that we consume in the world?
I believe you're not the only one who is frustrated with this, but if you take the only existing solution now is the carbon credit market, right? Which is supposed to be developed. It's so complex and so immature that it's pretty much impossible to use. So people who use it, they use it simply for the benefit of their public relation rather than to help the sustainability. Well, again, coming back to policy, hopefully it will be streamlined in the near future. On the technology side, what people do, are they trying to put all this complexity into the blockchain contract? So for the real user, it would look much more clear and much simpler. And those, if you go to any blockchain event, so that's probably one of the most popular topic over the last few years.
Yeah, I'd just add, I always, I'd agree that it'd be very sensible if we could construct an economic system where the carbon output was taken into account. But I guess I always believe photovoltaics to make impact, it was going to have to work in the present system. So we had to get the costs down to the level where you didn't get the, the benefit from the reduced carbon emissions. So, that was the way the real world was going to work in the time frame we were looking at, and that's what we had to develop the technology to be able to do.
And I think the public, as we can imagine, there must be a resistance in the public if you increase the price of their commodities because of these carbon footprint behind the product. And so we actually expect that the resistance from the public. So I think there's a lot to do with lobbying with the citizens, and also I think now maybe it's a time to get them informed even more with the scientific evidence, because sometimes people may be tired of the saying, hey, we need to go for sustainability. Now we need to add some new information to excite them, to make them aware that they are not paying for nothing, but they are paying for something good. But it would be a very long process and complicated process, and surely we expect a mechanism because there is a bunch of people, they are suffering from poverty, and we need to do something else to help them in this big environment. So it's very complicated.
I'm noticing a theme here. Everybody agrees, and ever since really 1972, or certainly since the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, people agree how to get the cost accounting done well. The issue is, in your questions reinforcing it, is why haven't we got to that level yet? It's been 30, 50 years. So what are the innovations we need in the policy market side to do and address the question that's been asked for a long time? And here you're getting two responses. One is technology kind of will handle that problem eventually, because there won't be any political opposition to a technology that produces renewable energies that are cheaper than fossil fuels. But initially, you will get opposition when things do cost more. And it's the increasing cost initially that can cause the technology to accelerate. So there's this challenge, this conundrum between the politics and the fast pace of the pathway. That the answer from the panelists is getting out to you, that we've got to find a way to accelerate. So grateful for your question. Did you have a follow-up? You good? Okay, thank you. Over here, left.
Hi, professors. Thank you very much for the insightful discussion. So my name is Edwin. I'm a PhD student in mechanical engineering from NUS. I think my question basically is that now we are making new technologies which are basically we are trying to accommodate our increases, like we have increasing use of energy, of water and everything. So at some point, do we need to make it in a way that we should focus on making use of resources more efficiently? Or what are your thoughts about it? Thank you.
So the question is, ought the major focus of science be in the efficiency question?
Yeah, I think for now, because we are making new things to accommodate how we use our resources, which are, I think, more wasteful. So should we at some point focus on managing how we use the resources instead?
Yeah, and by efficient, you mean least cost?
Not necessarily least cost, but I think the way we use resources.
In general?
Yeah.
Yeah, less waste, whatever the broader sense of efficiency.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Did you want to start working on biomass and water?
And actually, we handle the water or the related energy issue. Another important part is to the resource recovery.
Right.
So actually, we did not ignore this part. Resource recovery can make the circular economy, actually. This is one important part for the sustainability development, for sustainable development. That's my comment.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Did you?
Yeah, I think it's always very sensible to conserve resources and recycling resources is really very sensible as well. You know, in the case of solar, as I mentioned, there's some that are talking about you know, this insanely cheap electricity available on a scale that's never seen before, and some people are trying to think through the implications for what that might mean. But yeah, so we may not have you know, very severe constraints on energy in the future if we can open up, you know, this energy source that's got 100 times more energy than we're presently using available. But what that means, I don't know if anyone's thought that through yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we have two more questions. Oh, two more over here and then one over here. And just so you know, we've got this really big screen giving us these time limits. And it says 6:39 right now, 6 minutes, 39 seconds. So please be brief with your questions so we can get to a little wrap up too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, professors. I'm Shi Jilin, a postdoc from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. So right now, a lot of families hold their private cars, and we know the carbon dioxide emitted by the electric car, by the fuel cars, is a majority for the total emission of carbon dioxide. So right now, a lot of efforts and foundations have been paid to develop the electric car. But as you have mentioned above, a new technology solve one problem, but a lot of new problems may arise. So now the problem is that the recycle of the batteries, maybe it will be a big issue in the near future. So in your opinion, do you think the development of electric car is a promising method for the sustainability? Thank you.
What I'm going to do before we get an answer, I'm going to ask all three of you to give your questions so we can do one quick round, given we're now into the red numbers. So thank you for your question. And right behind you, can I turn to your colleague?
Hi, I am Iano Dulio, MS Biology in the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines. I I work on plant systematics and biodiversity. In my study, I produce a list of vascular plants in a specific island in the Philippines. And as my responsibility, I will be giving the list to the LGU, the local government unit. And my question is, if you were in my place, how would you convince the government to create a stricter policy and increase the budget for conservation of the forested areas?
Of deforested areas?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, for that awesome and gigantic question. Okay, great. And then third over here.
Hi, I'm Liu from Malaysia. Prof. Martin Green, do you like perovskite solar cell? And what is is perovskite solar cell the future of sustainable development? Yeah, just a simple one. Perovskite solar cell.
For you two, it's simple, not for me. Okay. Why don't we start with that one and then go backwards? The other two being on the deforestation science policy interface, and then the whack-a-mole effect of private cars and batteries and so on. So let's go with the last question first.
Perovskite. Yeah. So perovskites are the most promising complement to silicon because it can be stacked onto silicon to improve the performance quite substantially. But my criteria for photovoltaic materials are abundance, non-toxicity, stability, and the high efficiency. And perovskites tick two of those boxes, but it involves lead, which is a toxic heavy metal that's use is restricted in many countries. So it's not ideal from that point of view, but the real problem at the moment is the stability, getting it to the same level that people expect from photovoltaic product, which is one reason for its success. The solar cells really do last a long time. So it's not perfect, but it's the best option that's being explored at the moment.
As you respond to the last two questions we had here, again, one was on this whack-a-mole effect of private cars, and then the battery issue, and then the even bigger question of the science of deforestation and the policy process. Can I ask all of you to reflect more generally on what you would do, what would you tell policymakers right now, based on your research, is the most important thing that needs to happen in the policy process to transfer the knowledge in the scientific community to the policy world?
I think the integration of science and the policy development should be worked together. The integration is important. Okay. And the science provide the foundation for the policy making based on the evidence, the input from the scientists. Yeah. The integration is important. Otherwise, the policymaker, they don't know what's really happening in the real world.
Okay, integration, thank you. Yeah.
I'll try to answer some of the questions. I really have no idea how to answer about how to convince the government to allow to continue research on algae. Was it right? But at least there was. I really like this research on the biofuel production from algae, and I think it's actually quite promising. The only problem is that, and I'm sure we can live on this even. The only problem is that you would have to do some genetic modification, and you would have to use the ocean for as your field for the growth, and no one would is brave enough to release genetically modified algae into the ocean, and despite what we want to do with our experiments, it's probably a little bit too early. But I won't eradicate this idea entirely. On the electric vehicles, I don't think we see the end of the story, because there is still a lot of competition between batteries and hydrogen. And just as an example, British government announced that they will consider very seriously electrolysis and hydrogen production as a storage method for, not batteries, as a storage method for the wind power. So it's I think we're only at the beginning of the story, and who knows which gas we are going to drive in the future. So I'm sure that the consideration about the recycling will be there when we are going to talk about fuel cells versus batteries.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on this question?
No, I've got nothing to add.
Okay. And Prof, you're fine? Okay, that's great because we just hit 0-0. So let me just, which is so stressful when you see these last numbers coming down. Let me just wrap up by saying how grateful I am for this conversation in two ways. One, within the scientific community, we've heard 4 speakers, all working on unique problems, each of which by itself is important for helping society and policymakers achieve advances. But even more importantly, to come to this term integration, is integration across the scientific community. Innovation occurs as you learn across, but also even more importantly, with the policy and governance world. And let me just say the problem with that is that, as you know, each of you are doing really good things in your own lane, and it's really complicated, and you're so good at your lane. And then somebody else in the lane next to you is also really good in their lane, so good. But when you talk to each other, you don't sound very smart, right? You don't, because you don't know what the heck they're saying over here in this lane, so you stay in your lane. But the problem is, to solve the problems of the world, and this very topic today, you've got to cross your lanes. So how do we talk to each other where we take the rigor of our work, but then disseminate it across our communities towards the policy and governance process, I would argue is the most important question, not just facing students of policy and governance, but facing scientists like you, the real scientists. So thank you very much for a wonderful panel giving us your insights for such an important question.